Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third talk on British sporting art, generously sponsored by the Rowntree Tryon Galleries of St James's and Petworth. I would like to thank Jamie Rowntree again for his continuing support, which means that we can put on these talks without making a charge. I'm delighted to invite and introduce Sally Fletcher, who's going to give today's talk entitled Sporting Talk. Sally's the Packard curator at the National Horse Racing Museum. She gained her PhD from the University of Manchester when she developed her research interest in examining social change through objects and works of art. After finishing her doctorate, she then worked for the British Museum for nearly 20 years. During that time, she held a variety of curatorial roles, which gave opportunities to create both touring and permanent exhibitions. She's published a number of articles from about ancient luxuries to ceramic design and conducted fieldwork in both Turkey and Oman. I bet that wasn't done recently. Since joining the NHRM last September, Sally has been getting to grips with the collections of the British Sporting Art Trust and the National Horse Racing Museum. Her next exhibition at the museum will be on GD Armour and opens on the 1st of June. And as Sally said in her introduction, that Sporting Talk, which Sally's going to talk about today, opens next week on May the 18th. And just to add a couple of points and to repeat what Sally Bills has said, Sally has agreed to answer questions at the end of the talk. If you have a question, the procedure is just to use the Q&A button on the right-hand side, at the bottom of the right-hand side of the screen, and type the question there. I will see the questions as they come in and will be able to put them to Sally. The second point is that we're recording these talks and have made them available through our website and on our YouTube website. So if you want to revisit this talk or go back to the previous talks, please do through the website. I will now hand over to Sally. Good morning, Sally.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you very much for having me here today. Well, the Sporting Talk exhibition is all about the things that we say every day without really realising their sporting heritage or perhaps where they come from. I've really enjoyed putting this exhibition together. It's given me a chance to look right the way through the whole BSAT collection. And I wanted to say thank you right at the start to Sally Bills, who was amazing in supporting me and suggesting places to go and look. So on with the talk. And the first work that I wanted to talk to you about relates to ancient sports. Phrases relating to perhaps control and precision have come into English from sports such as falconry and archery. And when out hunting, a falconer will pass the bird's leash beneath their thumb for extra security. And this is where we get the phrase under the thumb from. Any bird that tries to escape will fly to the end of their leash, and it's known as being at the end of their tether as they beat their wings in frustration at not being able to escape. And then, of course, as they're trying to escape, they get shorter and shorter of energy and breath. And this is known as baiting your breath. So if you're waiting with bated breath, originally you were actually a falcon stuck at the end of their leather tether and unable to fly away. And I particularly love this print by Cecil Alden. It comes from a series that he did called Old English Sports and Games. And you can see the falcons, we think they're peregrines, that are being held here by the cadger in the foreground. I'm hoping you can see my mouse. Sally, could you just give me a nod if you can see that mouse moving?
Yes. Sorry.
Or a thumbs up?
I can't work out how to.
Yay, thank you. So that you can see this. So the mouse here is showing you these hooded falcons, and there's one being held here by the lady. And this is where we get the phrase hoodwinked from, because the bird's eyes would be covered to confuse them into thinking that perhaps night had fallen, and they would be able to be moved quietly to the point where the hunt could begin. Our next ancient sport perhaps to talk about is archery, and this wonderful print shows the Society of Royal British Archers in Gwerthillt Park in Denbighshire. And there's a rather lovely lady who's taking aim at the target, which is right over here in the distance. And archery is where we get phrases such as being highly strung, because a bow that is too taut in the bowstring won't behave predictably. It's also where we get the phrase, the rule of thumb, because in order to string your bow correctly, you need a space between the arc of the wood and the bowstring, in which you, at the top, in which you can fit your hand with a thumb up like that. So you follow the rule of thumb. Here you can see the targets have got a yellow centre, which is the modern convention, but originally in medieval period, the target would have had a white centre, and this point blanc, as it would have been called in, well, presumably from the Norman times when a lot of French was coming into the country. This point blanc was, of course, where we get the phrase shooting point blank from. Moving on to sports associated with fighting, where we have an awful lot of phrases in English coming into the language. Fighting in the form of cockfighting and in the form of boxing was incredibly popular, particularly during the late 18th and 19th century. And there is an interesting interplay between the phrases we find in boxing and in cockfighting. The boxing phrases follow from cockfighting. Now, cockfighting, as you can see here, this is the Royal Cockpit, was popular across all classes and was outlawed relatively early in the 19th century in 1835. But from both sports, we've inherited phrases like someone being cocky, meaning to be confident, or crestfallen, meaning to be defeated. As you can see, we've got a couple of gamecocks in the centre of this picture already engaged in a bout. This was called a set to. The birds were placed into the ring by their setter, and each would have been trimmed prior to the fight. Their wing and tail feathers would have been cut back. And this would mean that they wouldn't be tripped up or fall over their own feathers when they were beginning to get tired. But this phrase, to trim back the feathers in preparation for the fight, meant that the birds were cut out for the job. In other words, prepared for the job they were about to do. And obviously that's where we get the phrase from. The other interesting things around cockfighting is, of course, the birds would be wearing steel spurs, which is one place that we think we might get the phrase well-heeled from. A stronger, older fighting cock would be higher in the pecking order, which is a fairly obvious connection. But one that's perhaps a little less obvious is where we get the phrase stag night and hen night from. I used to be very confused by why we were mixing deer and hens, because I assumed the stag was of the variety with a lovely set of antlers. Turns out a young male gamecock is known as a stag. So stags and hens are in fact a matching pair. Moving on to boxing, we opened with this image of the rather wonderful Henry Pierce. And again, that connection with cockfighting, he was known as the game chicken because he used to sign his name shortened just hen. So there was a pun and a play on words there. The game chicken is, again, an interesting sort of little in-joke, but brave birds obviously were known as game and more timid ones were known as chicken. So here we have the game chicken in human form, Henry Pierce, and he's a rather fine-looking gentleman. This is another fine-looking gentleman, Mr. John Broughton. He is the person who gave us the very first set of boxing rules, which you see here on your screen. He's known as the father of boxing. He introduced the use of boxing gloves, known as mufflers, and mufflers were used in cockfighting also. The spurs, the natural spurs on the gamecocks, would be covered for sparring and practice. We still say the gloves are off, and this echoes the contrast between boxing with gloves and more brutal bare knuckle fights. Following the rather unfortunate death of one of his opponents in 1741, Mr. Broughton here published his rules in boxing in order to restrict future fatalities. And these were used for nearly a century with only minor revisions until the publication of the Marquess of Queensberry's rules, which happened in 1867. A lot of people have heard about Marquess of Queensberry, not so many about Mr. Broughton here. It's part 7 of John Broughton's rules, which are really important for us. They are, I'm not sure if you can all see, but they are down here at the bottom of the screen, part 7 here. And it says that no person is to hit his adversary when he is down, or seize him by the hand, the breeches, or any part below the waist. A man on his knees to be reckoned down. And this is where we get this sense of you don't punch someone below the belt, you don't hit a man when he's down. These two phrases come directly from these rules here. It isn't until the Marquess of Queensberry rules that we get timed bouts, and that is where the phrase saved by the bell enters the English language. Moving on. I really, really love this print, and this is one of the ones that I have to thank Sally Bills for directing me towards, because she was the one that pointed it out to me. This print is showing the long room at the Castle Tavern in Holborn, and this inn was a fighters' inn run by prize fighters, and it hosted sparring matches. And right at the front, the boxer Bill Richmond here is holding a pair of mufflers, but the man taking it on the chin, there's another phrase, in the centre of the image is Daniel Mendoza. And his boxing career was in decline at this time. He was at the latter stages of his career. The image might be poking fun at the publication of Mendoza's autobiography, which had happened the previous year. And you can see the title at the bottom says Sparring Dedicated to the Fancy. And the fancy were those who followed sporting events, particularly those who were interested in prize fighting. Now, the reason that I really, really love this image is this series of prints that are shown hanging on the wall behind the fight, and we'll be returning to them in just a second. So please keep those in mind. But before we get there, here is the gentleman who is getting a full punch in the face. This is Daniel Mendoza, and he was a champion prize fighter. And he lived in London, but had escaped religious persecution in Spain. And one of Mendoza's innovations in the world of boxing was to stand at an angle to the opponent, and this allowed him to rotate his hips and duck and dive, and it's where we get the phrase rolling with the punches from. And this rather strategic advantage also allowed Mendoza, who was relatively short and actually relatively light, to engage with people who were much heavier and bigger opponents. And he was therefore able to punch above his weight. And he was able to successfully beat much heavier opponents. His boxing prowess, incidentally, did much to challenge 18th century English anti-Semitic stereotypes. You can see the ropes in the background behind him, delimiting the limits of the boxing ring. And still today, we talk about those who are less fortunate as being on the ropes. In other words, like a tired boxer hanging on the ringside, or somebody who's down and out. Again, this comes from boxing, associated with someone who's lost because he's been knocked out in a fight. So back to those images of those prints hanging behind the boxing match. And what I love about them is that you can match them to prints that we have in the BSAT collection. So on the far side here, we have Molyneux, and this is a print of the gentleman himself, who's a rather interesting character. He was born a slave in Virginia, and fights between slaves, often to near death, both entertained and provided gambling opportunities for plantation owners. Now, this to us today, this sort of lack of respect for human life is deeply shocking. And Molyneux was forced by his owners to take part in prize fights, but as part of the bet placed upon him, won his freedom. And inspired by the success of the boxer Bill Richmond, who you saw in this image, you just see the edge of him here, who was also a freed slave. Molyneux left America and came to England. I find it also rather interesting that compared to the titles of all the other prints that you're about to see, Molyneux just gets his surname. However, other boxers get both names. This is Thomas Belcher, who you can see hanging next to Molyneux. Again, another interesting character, the younger of the Belcher brothers, who were both boxers. He was the publican at the castle in Holborn, that you see here. Here he's shown in his native city of Bristol, and you can see the Avon behind him. These roped outdoor enclosures were typical of early boxing fights. It allowed large crowds to gather. They would be drawn from both rich and poor. And fighters could indicate their willingness to engage in a boxing bout by throwing their hats into the ring. And there's a wonderful quote from the Morning Chronicle, which says, "Belcher first threw his hat into the ring over the heads of the spectators as an act of defiance to his antagonist, who received him in the ring with a welcome smile. The champions then stripped and set to." Here we have our final print that I was able to find in our collections. Here's Jackson in the middle, and here he is in his wonderful portrait. John Jackson brought the sport of boxing to the attention of the well-off in society. So he was known as Gentleman Jackson. And gentlemen were encouraged to attend his rooms and train. The English peerage attended. Byron was an admirer and a pupil of his. And he's looking very proud of himself standing here. Moving on to another area of sport, field sports, hunting, shooting and fishing. They're a source of common phrases, often for obvious reasons, relating to capture and escape, and they feature in descriptions of detection, policing and crime. So like a confused hound, a detective can be described as barking up the wrong tree. And the origin of this particular phrase appears to come from raccoon hunting in America and is around 200 years old. But the use of dogs, and then of course later hounds, for hunting comes right the way back from prehistoric times. And it's reflected in the English language. So if a person is described as dogged, they've got the determined persistence perhaps of a hunting hound. A news hound describes a journalist who is on a story and won't give up. And here, this wonderful print by Wolstenholme shows a hunting pack moving at great speed across the landscape. They're shown as being highly focused on their prey, they're relentless in their pursuit. And you can easily see where the phrase "to hound someone" may have come about when you're looking at images like this. This is a glorious, glorious print, and if you get the chance to come to the museum, do enjoy it. It looms large in the exhibition. Moving on to other phrases, I'm particularly fond of saying someone's a sitting duck, someone's an easy target, and it obviously comes from hunting wildfowl. A duck on the water is much easier to shoot than a duck in flight. And here, the huntsman seems to have bagged one duck hanging from his belt and is taking aim at the second, although I have a feeling he's missed his second target and he's about to lower his sights. So lowering, in other words, bring the gun down again. The sight, of course, is located on the barrel of the shotgun, is right here. And of course, it's now come to mean compromise or frustrated ambition. It's a really rather lovely print, this. And then the next one is guaranteed to raise a smile. Here we have a lady who I feel is probably giving it her best shot. She's shown supporting a gun on the neck of her pony. I'm not entirely sure if she has actually taken the shot yet. I would imagine if she had, the horse would possibly be absent from the picture. The horse doesn't appear to mind, however, and here John Collett is poking gentle fun at the lady in question because her costume mixes these very fashionable skirts and heeled shoes with a hunting coat and a hunting horn in here. This image is probably a reflection of 18th century male amusement at women trying to participate in manly sports such as shooting. There's a whole series of these, but this one we have selected for you. And then the early 19th century also saw a rather dramatic rise in the popularity of angling. And the chaos depicted in this print is poking fun at those who took part in the sport just because it was fashionable. And in the centre, we have a couple of dandies demonstrating their complete incompetence as they're trying to pull a piglet out the river. And over on this side, we've got an individual whose complete lack of interest, I think, means that his catch will be wriggling off the hook and escaping. The title of this work is Waltonizing, which of course refers to Isaac Walton, who wrote The Complete Angler. And then it has a subtitle, Greenland Fisherman, which is in reference to Green Lane. And this ran alongside the River Lee through London, so it was a popular spot for fishing at the time. So we've had Off the Hook, and then moving on back to Cecil Alden and his series of prints, Old English Sports and Games. This is a print that really shows the patience of a dedicated angler. He's clearly fallen hook, line and sinker for the sport. Otherwise, why would he be sitting out here in such dreadful weather? The hook, line and sinker phrase relates to the early 19th century, and it's this complete commitment to the sport. And it comes from fish who would swallow not only the baited hook, but the lead sinker and the entire fishing line, which is in between the two. Moving on to horse racing, lots of phrases come from horse racing connected with politics. We talk about electoral candidates being neck and neck. We talk about there being a front runner in the polls, or results being down to the wire, of course, being something that was strung across the finish line at racecourses once upon a time. Here, Stephen Alkin is showing horses, not Stephen, I'm so sorry, Henry, showing horses running for the finishing line. And from around about 1800, the horse that was in the lead of a race was described as being in the running. And this was quickly adopted to have a political meaning. And the phrase running mate also comes from racing. It's the horse that sets the pace in a race in order to help another horse win. Electoral systems are described as being first past the post. Of course, that is the winning post at the race course. And victors are often described, not just in politics, but in games more generally, as winning hands down. And this is a phrase that first appears in English in 19th century sporting papers, where winning hands down described jockeys who were so relaxed and so confident in their win that they were able to relax their grip on the reins towards the finish. Just a little amusement, here we have a wily huntsman who's changing horses for a fresher mount. And if a fast horse is substituted for a slow one, it's known as a ring-in in horse racing. It's where our term ringer, meaning similar appearance or a double, comes from. And describing someone who hides their ability, we also use the phrase dark horse, which is a term used in racing to describe a horse that was a bit of an unknown quantity. The final section of the exhibition talks about ball sports, and these are probably the phrases that are the most obvious in English, being able to still connect them to their origin. We talk about people dropping the ball, we talk about people being on the ball when we're associating them with success. And here we have John Ward, who's captured the sudden joyous moment of the sort of perfect hit, which is where we get the English phrase being knocked for six. Here you see Colin Cowdrey doing marvellous things. And this one here, Bisham Bedi, the sudden kind of moment, split seconds before all the energy and power of the bowler is released. And it's no wonder that the phrase being bowled over has entered the English language. We, of course, have stumped for confusion and tricky situations, which are known as a sticky wicket. This sculpture by Joyce Bidder was her debut piece at the Royal Academy in 1932. It's actually painted plaster, even though it looks like bronze. And here we've got one rugby player tackling another. And despite this, the player in front is continuing to carry the ball, which we associate with being in charge of a situation or responsible. And of course, if you drop the ball, you're considered to be out of control. And then the final print I want to talk about is this one, which relates to the phrase, "There's the rub." You may be familiar with the piece in Hamlet where they say, "To sleep, perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub." And it now means difficulty, obstruction, or a problem. But the phrase is around 400 years old, and it refers to the uneven playing surface in a bowls match that can cause the ball to slow or roll off course unpredictably. So that is the end of our journey through sporting phrases and the BSAT collection. Thank you very much for listening. I understand, Tim, you might have some questions. I'm hoping you have some questions. And thank you for having me.
Sally, thank you very much for that wide-ranging talk. I'm certainly surprised by how many phrases have come down over many years and that we still have them in our day-to-day conversation. So thank you very much. I was very much aware that when you came into the museum, you had to get an exhibition up and running very quickly, and you chose this as the subject. I wondered why you did and what inspired you to explore that area.
Well, I had read an article in the New Yorker, which actually came out a while ago now. I think it was 2018. And the title of it was, "We use sports terms all the time, but where do they come from?" And I read it with huge interest. And I think it was that inspired me to then go digging to find more examples. The article that I read obviously had a lot of references to things like American football, which I felt was perhaps less relevant to us over here in the UK. But that was where the idea came from. So it had been kind of brewing in my head for a little while. I am quite generally interested in why we say what we say. And the other aspect that using that as a theme for the show gave me was being able to delve more deeply into those social history aspects. So who was the person in the print? What was their background? Why were they here in the UK? Which you perhaps got a flavour of when we talked about particularly the boxing prints. So those sort of two things together was why we did what we did. And it was also just a fantastic opportunity to get a real mixture of things out from the BSAT collection, which of course was brilliant for me being new. It gave me a great opportunity to really look at across the whole piece.
Are all the prints owned by the BSAT and are they all in the exhibition?
So everything you've seen today is BSAT collection and they are all in the exhibition.
There's some you haven't shown.
There are things I've kept back a few things. So I hope that people will come and see the exhibition because there are things you haven't seen. Some are works that are in the BSAT collection and some are works that are in NHRM. So there is more to see if you manage to make the trip to Newmarket.
There's one question that's come in. Which sport do you think was generated the most terms?
I really think it's that combination of cockfighting and boxing and how they play between each other. I think, and they were enormously popular and happened alongside other sports. So you would go racing and the cockfighting would be happening alongside at the same time. So I think those sort of fighting terms are probably the most. And then I think followed by perhaps horse racing, again, because it was such a popular sport in the 19th century.
Up his sleeve, is that a term from coaching? Is that in the exhibition?
It's not in the exhibition. It's one I haven't come across. That's interesting. Thank you, whoever suggested that one. That's one I'll go and have a look at.
You've cited a lot of historical examples that came into the language. Are you aware of any phrases that you think might survive for the next 200 years from our modern sports?
Ooh.
I suppose football and rugby would.
Yes, and I think Yeah, I think those phrases particularly in the section that I did on ball sports, there were so many phrases that people said, oh, well, yes, that's obvious, because they're very current now. And I think the popularity of football, rugby, possibly golf, I think those are the ones that we'll see going forwards.
Is there a particular picture that's your favourite?
Absolutely, has got to be the lady shooting pony. I'm going to click back to her because she's just hilarious and brilliant, and I just love her. The other prints in this series, if anybody has the time to go and have a little search through the British Museum online collections, the prints and drawings department hold more of this series, and some of them are very rude and they're all very funny.
I'd just add to what else the BSAT is doing. For those readers of the field, we've been featuring a picture every month this year, and the picture for August will be Ladies Shooting Pony.
Yeah.
So it's going to be in the field in August, which I think comes out in mid-July. If you selected one work, what happens to the pictures when the exhibition's over?
So they are all normally stored on site in Newmarket, and they will go back into dark storage for a bit of a rest. It doesn't do colour prints much good to be permanently in the light. They will fade. So the Ladies Shooting Pony and I'm going to click forward to this one, Waltonising. They are both on permanent exhibition in Palace House, but they're kept in drawers, so they're in the dark and you need to open the drawers to see them. So they will still be really easily available once we close the exhibition. The other prints will go back into store, but of course all BSAT members are welcome to contact us and ask us. They can see their collection. We have those facilities available in Newmarket, so if people are interested, get in touch.
Okay, and the final question, you've ranged over a wide range of pictures, genres, artists, years going back to what, 400 years. How did you go about choosing the works? This is the final question.
Oh, that's okay. I really started from the phrases and then tried to match those to images that I could see in the image bank that we have for the BSAT collection. We are incredibly fortunate in that you have carefully taken images of your collection through the years, and so there is a fantastic image bank to work from. So I was matching phrase to picture, and again I have to credit the invaluable help of Sally Bills in all of this, because she was right there next to me in the office coming up with ideas and pointing me to different things because she knows the collection so well. So that's where I worked it that way round. It was a slightly different way of working for me. I normally work from the object to the idea, not the idea to the work of art or to the object. So it was a good mental exercise for me as well.
So thank you very much, Sally. That was an illuminating talk, and I think shows how much we can use sporting art to as the basis for many other studies. It's not just a look at the pictures and the sport that's being portrayed in that particular image.
I would absolutely agree with that, yes.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thanks. So pity we can't applaud. This is to remind everyone that the next talk is on Thursday, the 17th of June at 11 o'clock. It will be given by Jenny Hand of the Moneyes Museum, and her talk is entitled Sir Alfred Munnings, Mansions, Parks and Lakes, the Making of a Sporting Artist. We hope you'll be able to join us for that talk in June. Please tell your friends and family. Many thanks, and thank you again, Sally.